welcome to another episode of Nik in the Kitchen. As you guys know, I'm Nik, also known as Lizzie Angel, and this is a series where I teach you how to make things that are really good, and then I eat those things, and then you guys wish you had those things, and so then you make those things. And that's what we're doing today with a chicken. So we're gonna roast an entire chicken, and what we're gonna do with this one is spatchcock it, which means take the backbone out and butterfly it. And what that does is allows us to get a chicken that is perfectly cooked from the breast to the thigh. No dry breast, no undercooked thighs, and that's what we're going for. So right now I have my little setup here so that we can get started. So I'm gonna put this to the side so we can actually prep everything so that we don't have a lot of cross-contamination going, because that's the danger, if you want to say, of making chicken or any type of poultry is if you're not careful, you have a lot of salmonella and sometimes even E. coli. So you want to make sure that we're not getting that in every other place. So let me move this stuff to the side. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is grab one of my little bowls, and what that does is make sure that we don't have any cross-contamination of spices or containers, because we want to keep that bacteria just at the chicken that will cook off itself. So the first thing I'm gonna do is add some salt. This is kosher salt, and I'm only gonna add in about 1.5 teaspoons. The rest of the salt will go on the outside of the chicken. If you're using table salt, reduce the amount that you use by half as far as volume, not weight, because they're not the same and they will cook very differently. You'll have a very over salted chicken. So there's 1.5 teaspoons there. We're gonna add in just about 1/2 teaspoon of cracked black pepper. I ground this morning. If you have a grinder, the same thing. And then we're gonna add in some of our other ingredients. So we have this 1/4 teaspoon of chili powder. We're gonna add in some cumin. And you can add in more or less of anything that you want. If you really like cumin, you can add in a bit more of that. I love paprika, so I'm adding in just a bit more of that than everything else. I think it really brings out that smokiness and helps the chicken kind of taste like it was on a grill rather than in the oven. I'm also gonna use some poultry seasoning. That's our herbs here. When you're roasting a chicken at this high of a heat, you can burn herbs, so this is a way to get that flavor without having to actually use fresh herbs, which we will and can add in at the end. This is Hatch chili powder. It's completely optional, but I'm going for kind of that Nando Peri Peri style chicken, so I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna up my quantity back to 1/2 teaspoon for our onion powder, because that's just like foundational. If you're from the South, you use garlic powder, onion powder, and everything, and that's just how it is. And I'm gonna do the same thing with garlic powder. And I'm gonna take this spoon, I'm just gonna mix it in. And this is gonna be our spice rub that we put on the underside of the chicken. And then we're gonna add it to our butter, what's remaining, so that we can put it under the skin. We're not gonna put it on the skin because it will burn and it'll give your chicken kind of a charred, almost bitter taste, and we don't want that. We want to taste all this flavor. So now that I have my spice mix made, I'm just gonna go ahead in advance and add half of it to my butter. I already know that's about how much I'll need, and so I'm gonna add it to this softened butter. This, you can use salted or unsalted, it doesn't really matter. The amount of salt in the unsalted butter doesn't make your chicken any saltier. So I'm just gonna mix that around until it's one homogeneous mixture. And what we'll do is put this under the skin, and that's a way to get flavor on both sides and also keep your chicken really moist, because it melts down and it bastes it while it cooks. All right, so we have our spices mixed all in with our butter. We're gonna set this to the side. We don't need it until we flip our chicken over, and you'll see what I mean by that when I bring the chicken back to the center. Okay, so now we have our chicken back in front of us. I like to line my pan with foil. Most times I roast it actually on a rack. If you don't have a rack, it's absolutely fine. The foil will catch all of your drippings and also keep your pan clean. So you can easily just dump this out, make gravy, or rebaste the chicken at the end. So what we're gonna do first is I'm just kind of positioning my chicken so that the back is exposed, the spine here. And This has been sitting out, but you always want to make sure that your chicken is as dry as possible so that you can get a really crispy skin. If you can find a chicken that's been air chilled, it's even better than a chicken that has liquid in the package with them. And so now I'm just gonna take a sharp knife. You wanna use a knife that you can control. Don't use anything too big because it's really hard for you to control it while you're taking out the backbone. And so you can feel around. I know that this up here is the neck, and I know that this down here is the tailbone. They're pretty even. And so I like to feel where it's gonna easily cut down and kind of use my fingers to make an indentation, and that's like my trace line. And so I can feel here. You may run into a couple snags, but if you do this, it'll be much easier. Then I just grab it here, and you want to be careful with your fingers, and then you want to trace your line, pressing firmly, but not too hard, because again, it's gonna glide through, and if you get stuck anywhere, for me, I usually kind of just refill, see if I'm in the right place. It goes through, and then we're good. So right here, I have like a little snag. So I go ahead and cut through all the way so I can see what's holding me. Am I in the right place? Am I in the wrong place? And I see that there's a little joint there. So I'm just gonna press it until I get it. And then we've cut this side. And then we're just gonna repeat that on the other side. All right, so I've cut out the backbone. This is the spine, and these are perfect for making your own stocks and gravies. So I like to save them. I just take a Ziploc bag and turn it inside out and keep my hand. I always want to keep a clean hand because there's still things that I'm gonna touch. So until I'm finished with that, I go ahead and put it in here. And I'm just gonna sit it to the side because I need my hand to press it in. You can also break it if you're strong enough, or if the backbone's weak enough. It's not really you, it's the backbone. And I'm just gonna sit that to the side until I'm done. Now, I know I'm gonna need to touch something in just a second. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do this part and then wash my hands and come back. Because again, cross-contamination is really bad. We don't wanna do that. And so in here, in our chicken, you can see that this now comes apart really easily. And there's a bone here that is a bit firmer. And you have two options. You can just kind of stick your knife in here to loosen it up, or you can press it really hard. I just like to stick my knife in, it's really easy. And then I press it down this way. And when I turn it over, I'm also gonna give it a compression, but this opens it up so that it's all exposed, and now we can season it appropriately. But first I'm gonna wash my hands. So now that we're back, again, we're gonna keep our paper towel close. I would try to use the same side that I patted down before so that when I press it on the counter, it's not like everywhere, even though we're gonna wipe up this counter anyway. You never know how far liquids can kind of fly, which is why you should not rinse your chicken out in the sink, because you tend to spread bacteria more than you clean your chicken. There's no temperature of water that's gonna kill the bacteria or appropriately clean the chicken the way that you think it's happening. So we've patted that down because again, we want things very dry. And we're gonna use first our high heat oil. So I'm using avocado oil. This oil can go up in temperature so that the smoke point is a lot higher. You don't want to use like an olive oil. It has a very low smoke point, but avocado oil and canola oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, those are really good ones. I'm just gonna put this on generously, and this is gonna coat the chicken, again, to give us really moist chicken. It's not water, so it's not taking away anything that we did with the paper towel, but just helping it to have moisture, I guess, in the meat. And then we're gonna take our seasoning blend that we made, and we're gonna pour this on. And it has salt in it, but as I mentioned before, we do like to use more salt. The general rule for poultry is 1 teaspoon of kosher salt per pound of chicken. And that will make sure your chicken is appropriately seasoned, and also that it dry brines appropriately. And we're also, just for good measure, gonna add in some more black pepper, because black pepper is delicious. And as long as we have enough, it'll be really good. And with this being a more smoky version of a roasted chicken, it'll taste really great. So now we're gonna flip this over, and I just grab it right in the back and make sure that it's spread out so that the thighs are flat against the pan. Because again, we're roasting this whole, and so when it's in this position, what happens is the heat circulates appropriately. This is slightly higher and thicker, so the breast will reach an internal temperature of about 150 degrees. The thighs, we want them at about 170 to 175 degrees, and then everything is cooked at the right temperature. I also like to go ahead and just tuck these in, these wing tips, because we don't want them to burn. So we keep them under everything else. So now that we have our chicken flipped over, I am going to pat it dry. Again, we want to make sure the skin is as dry as possible because we really, really want a crispy skin. And I know we did this before I flipped it, but because it was turned over where it was wet on the other side, I saw some moisture there, and you can never go wrong with just absorbing all of this moisture off of the skin. So we can set that to the side for the final time. Before I repeat the process, just as I did it on the other side, I'm gonna use this butter. And because I'm going under the skin, I wanna go ahead and add my oil now onto the skin. So we're just gonna drizzle this over, and you just want it to be appropriately drizzled. We'll kind of rub it in before we finish, so there's no appropriate amount, just until it looks good. And so now we're going to add this butter underneath the skin, because again, this is flavor on this side that won't burn, and it's also self-basting, which means it'll just make the meat really juicy. So in order to do this, we're gonna kind of feel around for where the skin lifts up. And so now we have the skin open under the breast. On one side, we'll do the same for the other side, because we're gonna stick the butter into these pockets, and then we'll go under the breast as well into where the thigh is, because that'll get us access to that part of the meat. We want everything to have this really delicious, juicy flavor. All right, so I like to break this down into 4 parts. I do 4 big pieces under the skin, and then I rub it in on top of the skin. And because we're just using this for this, it's okay to go back and forth with this spoon in this bowl. And this is why it's important to kind of prep everything before, because you can see how messy my hands are getting and how much I'm touching raw chicken. So make sure you have everything ready to go before you start. And so now that these are under, I'm also gonna move this knife out of the way. We don't need that anymore. I'm just gonna press it in. And this is just making sure it's kind of evenly distributed, getting it up under that thigh gap that we created under here. We don't want it on top, because again, it'll burn. And we're just rubbing that in. And it's gonna go even drip down into the wings a bit, so it's all under there. You can kind of see it under the skin, and that's going to cook the meat. And so now we can repeat our process. Because these bowls are just for this chicken, I can use all of this again. And so we're going to add in some salt. And I measured this out beforehand, so I know it's the right amount. And we're gonna do our pepper also. And this really is just my poultry pepper, this grind. And then we'll do our seasoning, what's remaining. And now we're just gonna rub it in. We added a little bit of that seasoning to the top, but we don't wanna cover it like we did the other side, because again, we don't want that to burn. And I like to make sure that I've got my wings together, that you get in between here where this skin is, so that everything's seasoned no matter what piece of chicken people get. And I'm gonna wash my hands, and then I'm gonna put this in the fridge We put it in the fridge to let the air of the refrigerator continue to dry out the skin in combination with the kosher salt. This is a dry brine, so what it's doing is pulling moisture out of the skin and pulling the moisture into the center of the chicken, so in the meat where we really want it, so that when it cooks, the meat is really juicy, but the skin is really crispy. So I'm going to do that now, and when I come back, we'll put it in the oven. All right, you guys, so my chicken has been in the fridge for an hour. You wanna make sure that you have it in the fridge for at least an hour, but it's best if you have it in up to 24 hours because that really pulls that moisture out of the skin. Now I'm gonna roast this at 500 degrees for 45 minutes to an hour, or until my thighs reach 170 degrees and the breasts are between 150 and 155 degrees. All right, y'all, so we have our chicken out of the oven. The skin is very crispy, and as you can see, there's a lot of juices that were produced. So we've let it rest for at least 15 minutes so that the juices can redistribute. There's nothing worse than cooking a perfect piece of meat and cutting into it and just watching all the juices flow out, because you'll get an incredibly dry piece of meat even though you did everything else right. So we've let it rest. Now I'm gonna transfer this over to a cutting board and cut it up so that we can serve it and eat it. I think the easiest way to cut a chicken once it's cooked is to first cut it in half, because it's easier to work with one side at a time rather than trying to cut from both sides. And you can clearly see what we have. So we have the whole breast here. And as you can see, this meat is really juicy. Like, you press it, there's juices, it's delicious. And so we're gonna follow the natural curves of the bird. So in between the thigh and the breast, there's like a little line here. So I like to just cut down, and then we have a thigh. That simple. We have a thigh and a leg. I don't really separate them because I'm gonna eat both, so I just put it together so no one judges me for two pieces. They only judge me for having one. See, that's how you trick the system. And then we're gonna go underneath the breast against the rib. And a lot of people like to slice the breast this way, but you're really slicing with the grain, which also gives you a drier piece of meat. So it's really effective to slice against the rib and then cut horizontally. I can smell this chicken. It smells so good. Like, I want to eat it right now. And anything that's left on the bone, I usually, if we don't pick over it, I usually just go ahead and add it to my stocks just to make them a little bit more robust and add some of that collagen back in along with what we get from the bone. So now we're just left with our wing, which I'll admit is the hardest part for me to cut off because there's this little extra piece. So most of the time I just eat it before anybody else comes into the room. And then if no one sees a butchered wing, no one knows that it was butchered, it's disappeared. That's just what happens. So sometimes I just take this piece off, I separate it. Again, it's difficult for me. If you're a master butcher, then by all means do your thing. And then we have a whole half of a chicken here. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the other half of the chicken off camera and transfer it to the board and show you the finishing touches. All right, so I have my pieces cut, and before I show you the finishing touches, I wanted to just point out, sometimes when you cut your chicken, the skin kind of slides off. It's a very moist, very juicy piece of meat. And so it's okay to just grab that skin and lay it right on top like it never happened. Most people eat the skin off anyway, so you can just say that you cooked it so well that the skin just slid right off. So I'm just gonna add those pieces back on, and so everything looks the same. And the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna rip some parsley. You can also use cilantro, especially for this recipe, but I like parsley. I think that it just brings kind of like a nice herby flavor without being too overpowering like cilantro can be sometimes. And I just like to put that right on top. It just adds a little bit of freshness. You could chop it if you want, but I think that the roughness of just tearing it, one, makes it easier to take off if people don't really want it, and it also makes the board look really pretty when you serve it to people. So here's our chicken. I'm gonna try a piece because that's what I do. I already told you guys I steal chicken. And so I'm gonna just rip this piece off. Okay, yeah, you guys definitely wanna make this. It's seasoned perfectly. If you want it thin, you can sprinkle a little extra salt, but we salted it appropriately. The skin is really crispy, even after it cools down for a little bit. And then getting those bites of parsley in there really adds a nice bright pop of freshness. I'm gonna go and finish my chicken. You guys go and make this. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.